Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Buckeye Readers Chat. I'm Nicole.
I'm Krista.
And today we want to talk to you about biographies. The library is filled with biographies.
Yes.
But I don't think that they're always people's top choice. Krista, do you read biographies?
I do.
What type of biographies do you tend to pick?
I prefer historical, tendency towards war-related biographies.
Gotcha. I don't really read too many biographies. I've picked up a few over my course of reading, but they're not typically my first choice. But I would say that I do find researching somebody's life to be rather fascinating. And that's what we did today. Krista and I both took on the task of researching one person each for you. And we're going to share a little bit about those people for you today. So Krista, who did you research?
I chose Anne Frank. Mm-hmm. Anne Frank is a 12-year-old German Jewish girl. Mm-hmm. And she basically, the two things that were going against her was she was Jewish, and she was living in a country where Adolf Hitler was in power.
Right.
And that started the whole course of her life, which eventually led to her death. In her family, in June of 1942, when she was 12 years old, they gave her a diary. And at that point, she started writing into it. In July of 1942, the family went into hiding. They went to, it was 8 people, to 450 square feet.
Ooh, that's not a lot of space.
761 days. It was...
That's roughly 2 years.
2 years in an attic above a business. And they were hidden behind a bookcase. And during the day, when the business was open, they could not move. They could not do anything for the fear of being found.
Wow.
Unfortunately, there's based on what I researched, there's no specific person. There's speculation about who said where they were, that he ended up in them being found. But in 1944, August of 1944, her family was found and taken and put into concentration camps. The secretary that lived in the building or worked in the building, she noticed, she was upstairs in the attic, and one of the Nazi soldiers, there's a briefcase that belonged to Otto, which was Anne's father, and he dumped the briefcase because he was taking stuff out of the apartment. And this lady went back, all 327 pages of Anne's diary she found and she put aside, and years later it was actually put into print.
Wow, and that's how we have Anne's diary today.
Yes.
That's incredible. Do we have other books about Anne, just aside from her diary?
We do. We have like storybooks about Anne, but more so, most of it is dealing on her life, not necessarily bios, but stories about her life.
Gotcha. And how old was she when she passed away?
She was 15.
That's really young.
Yeah, she was in a concentration camp. The secretary was the one that lived the longest.
Gotcha.
Just heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said she was in a concentration camp. Which one was she in?
Auschwitz.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So while Krista and I were working on this topic, we found out a very interesting fact about the both of us. We have both been to Prague in the Czech Republic, and more specifically, we've both been to Poland, where the very famous concentration camp that she just mentioned, Auschwitz, is, and we've both had a tour of Auschwitz. What's your thought? What was your takeaway while you were there?
Tragedy. A good memory that I'm glad I went, but difficult to. It's like you could sense death. You could sense exactly what happened there, and to me it doesn't make sense how one person can stand up and say, I'm taking over the world, and people follow blindly.
I remember being the day that I went for the tour there was very disconcerting because it was such a lovely day. Like, the weather was beautiful, the sun was out, the clouds were out, and then you're reminded of where you are and the history behind where you're at, and that emotion weighs on you. And so it's just, it's so hard to describe, but it's a very emotional place. Just to see things and have it described to you, it's very emotional. So,
And it's a good reminder that let history teach us not to let something like that ever happen again.
yeah, absolutely. Well, moving on from this very deep, dark place, I will talk to you. Let me share with you who I researched. I researched someone who is also a little bit more prominently known, Sacagawea, or it's also pronounced Sacagawea. There's some speculation about how her name is actually pronounced, because there was some, there's not always accuracy with how her name was recorded over the years, but she is the Shoshone Indian girl who took Lewis and Clark during their expedition and guided them west across the U.S. Through the Louisiana Purchase, which at the time Thomas Jefferson had purchased, and they wanted to scout a route through the Louisiana Purchase to the Pacific Ocean. And so she is noted as being a prominent individual who made that happen. She comes from a tribe of nomads, so she's very informed on where they were and how to survive where they were. She was able to gather safe food for them to eat during their travels. And a lot of people may recognize that she's the individual that carried her infant son on her back. She actually gave birth to him while they were out there. And her son, John Baptiste, who was born from her husband, a French-Canadian fur trapper. I'm not going to try and say his name. I could try, but it's a tough one. But she did a lot of translating with the local tribes. She would translate it to her husband, who was French, who would then tell a French translator who would translate it to Lewis and Clark in English. The other interesting fact is she also did some sign language that she was used a lot in her translations as well, and helped with the communication process as well. So
How old was she when she was captured?
So she was captured from her Shoshone tribe when she was about 10 years old. Wow. Her and among others, and then when she was around 15, they say she was sold to her husband, who she married. He actually had a second wife too, another Indian woman, but he traveled with them, which was one of the things that I didn't realize. I thought she went with Lewis and Clark on her own with her son strapped to her back, but her husband was with her while she was out there, and he also traveled with them too. So
nice.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, I think they did. I think she was around 18 when they traveled the expedition. It's actually called the Corps, spelled C-O-R-P, not C-O-R-E, Corps of Discovery, or some people called it the Travel of Discovery.
Oh,
so,
neat. Okay.
So she's very interesting, and actually because she's so prominent, she's featured in many statues that you'll find located all across the U.S. She has 3 mountains and 2 lakes that are named after her, multiple markers, paintings, musical compositions, schools, and even a museum.
That's amazing.
On top of a 76-mile pipeline in North Dakota that transports oil as well.
What a legacy.
Yeah, and more prominently, you'll recognize her on the golden dollar that came out in 2000. So you'll see her on the front of that golden dollar, and then if you flip it around to the back side, there's a soaring eagle surrounded by 17 stars, and those 17 stars represent the states in the Union during the expedition of Lewis and Clark in 1804.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you.
So there's a lot of history, and Sacagawea is connected to quite a bit of it. So the reason I chose Sacagawea is I actually did a report on her in 2nd grade. So I don't remember much about it, but I just decided I wanted to learn more about her.
I was going to say, tell me about it.
Yeah, I don't remember. I remember I did not do very well with my reading back then, but we're doing better. doing better. So I actually had all of my research came from juvenile biographies that we have. They're very informative, just in case there's any question. Like, adult biographies are great, but juvenile biographies are chock full of information. So they're also a great source. I also want to throw out that we have great databases with Gale, and you can do a lot of research with biographies through Gale in Context through our digital resources at the library.
I never thought of that, but Anne Frank is probably listed.
Yeah, I bet there's a
Gale
ton of
as well,
information
yeah.
on her. So, and they also list, connect you with other articles. They don't just give you a biography, but you can connect to other articles. So there's lots of different ways to get more resources on the individual you're researching.
Oh, very nice.
So,
Very
yeah.
nice.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us about our talk on biographies. Share with us maybe a biography that you enjoyed, or maybe share with us the name of somebody you'd like to learn more about. So, and you can always reach out to the library and we can help you find some information on that person. So,
Yes. Thank you for joining us.
and we'll see you next
See you.
time.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.